Exercise Theory, Chapter 9, Body Composition. So what exactly is body composition? Our body composition is what we are made up of, so the amount of muscle, fat, water, and bone within a human body. We will tend to break down body composition into fat mass and fat-free mass. So fat mass and being fat, or fat-free mass, which would be the muscle, the water, and the bone. Understanding body composition will help us understand how our bodies, about our client's body shape and their risk of lifestyle illnesses. So there are risks that come with carrying too much body fat, and so we need to be aware of this. We want to make sure that we are very sensitive and respectful when it comes to the concept of body composition, because this is a very sensitive topic. But we also have to simply remember that there are lifestyle risks that come with carrying too much body fat. Also, understanding this can help you create exercise programs that will help people in their fat reduction. So energy balance is going to be a balance between how many calories we consume versus how many calories we expend. And that creates a balance. If you consume more calories than you use, that is going to put you in a positive energy balance, which means that you will be gaining weight, and often that'll be in the form of body fat. If you are in a negative a negative energy balance, that means that you are consuming fewer calories than you utilize and that you burn off, then that will put us in a negative calorie balance, and that will cause us to lose weight. Our energy input are the things that we eat. So it's our carbohydrates, our fat, and our protein. These are the things that will provide our body with energy. And we measure this in calories or kilojoules. Technically it's kilocalories, but we've simplified the terminology to calories. How many calories we consume. Carbohydrates, fats, and proteins all have a specific number of calories. And these different foods, so carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, will provide different amounts of energy. Now, fat has gotten a bad rap because we went through a very big low-fat craze, because when we consume fat, there are more calories per gram of fat than there are per gram of carbohydrates or protein. So we get 4 calories from carbohydrates and proteins, whereas we get 9 from fats. So fats are very calorie dense. And that really kind of made them the culprit for weight gain. But it's not actually that simple. So when we consume fat, doesn't mean that it's stored as fat. When we take in fat, it is broken down in our body, and it will either be utilized for energy or it will be stored as fat if it's too many calories. But the same thing actually happens when we take in carbohydrate. When we consume carbohydrate, it will get broken down into glucose, and that glucose will either be used as an energy source or it will be stored as fat. So fat itself is not bad, but we want to make sure that we watch our fat intake, because that's where it's very easy to allow excess calories to slide into the diet. The other thing that you have to really know is that to answer this question, we have to consume fat. Fat is absolutely required in our diets. It's required for our nervous system. It's required for insulation and other factors. It's how we get some of our fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamin D, into our system. So we should be consuming some fat. We just want to be cautious that we're not consuming too much. So what is our energy output? So really, our energy output is the energy that's used by the body to maintain itself and be active. So simply existing requires energy output, and then being active requires energy output. Our metabolism, when we often use the term metabolism, that's all the energy requiring process that occur in the body. So simply existing requires effort, and that effort is going to be used to grow, repair, and for breathing and circulation, etc. Okay? When we talk about our resting metabolic rate, this is just going to be how many calories we use, so the energy that we use to maintain our body functions when we're at rest. So when we're simply lying in one place, how many calories does it exist simply, or does it require simply to exist? So that actually will make up 70% of our daily energy expenditure is simply breathing, repairing, growing, digesting. All of these things will require a great deal of energy expenditure. So we automatically do have a baseline metabolism. Where physical activity comes into play is these are going to be extra calories we could burn above and beyond our resting metabolic rate. They do ask here, what factors can change the amount of energy that's required at rest? The answer to that question are things such as our body composition. So fat-free mass, so muscle especially, requires energy. So if I have more muscle, my resting metabolism will be higher. Okay? So if I'm active and I'm doing all these types of movement, when I'm then at rest, my body is going to repair and change, and things are dynamic, and I will burn more calories at rest. My age will play a role. When we're quite young, our metabolisms are going high speed because we're using a lot of energy to grow. As we go through puberty, etc., our metabolisms go sky high. And you've seen that with teenage boys, that all they seem to do is eat and eat and eat, and it's crazy how much they can eat. It's because their metabolisms are so high dealing with their increased growth. As we age, our metabolisms naturally seem to decline. So it is normal to say metabolisms decrease with age. Especially women will find that there's issues with their metabolism once they pass their reproductive years. When they hit menopause, they find a drop. But I will caution you that age-related decreases in metabolism are quite frequently a cause of decreased physical activity. That it tends to be that as we get older, we move less. And because we move less, we're no longer growing and changing and repairing things in our body, and our metabolism drops. Gender makes a role. Men tend to have a higher resting metabolic rate, and partly because of their higher amount of muscle mass. That's what makes a big difference. There could be some ethnic differences, as well as your physical condition. So pregnant women will have a higher metabolic rate. They are growing a baby inside of them. So their metabolism will actually go quite high. Nursing women will have a higher metabolism. Athletes will, because like I said, if you're physically active, you're building and growing and repairing. So when those processes are occurring, you're utilizing calories to let them happen. So just some general points that should be made about intensity and weight loss. There was a lot of, I don't know if I want to say confusion, but maybe misinformation. So for quite a few years, we would talk about lower intensity exercising. That's your fat burning zone. So I don't know if you've ever hopped on a treadmill or elliptical and you go in the fat burning zone. And like, the pre-programmed, the fat-burning pre-programmed one, and it's a low intensity. What happens? So remember our different energy, our different metabolic and energy levels, right? So if I am working at very low intensity, I will use my aerobic system, okay? My energy-producing system, that's aerobic. If I am working at very low intensities or sitting down, for example, I will be utilizing my aerobic system. So I will go through aerobic metabolism, and I will use oxygen, right? So everything's done aerobically. Because I'm not doing anything, my body is going to rely on fat because I have plenty of time while sitting down to mobilize fat and utilize that to serve any of my energy needs. When I get up and I start to move, I will continue to utilize fat if I'm going slow. So if I'm going for a slower walk, I will use fat primarily as an energy source. My body has plenty of time to metabolize or to mobilize the fat, to break down the fat, to get the glucose to have energy. as I start to increase that intensity, I'll no longer have the time to utilize fat. So fat's going to take too long. So now I'm going to start to draw on my carbohydrate stores. I'm not talking about carbohydrate like the bread in my stomach that I just ate, but rather energy is either stored as fat or as glycogen. And glycogen would be what we consider carbohydrate, right? So glycogen is the sugar that's stored in our muscle ready to go. So if I go to a higher intensity, I'm going to start to utilize my glycogen stores or my carbohydrate stores. And as the intensity increases, I use less fat, more carbohydrates until I use exclusively carbohydrates because I don't have enough time to metabolize the fat. So low intensity, you'll utilize fat. As you increase the intensity, you use less fat, more carbohydrates until you go to a high enough intensity that you exclusively use carbohydrates. So back in the day, they would argue, well, if I want to burn fat, I need to move slowly. If I move slowly, it will give my body time to burn fat. Makes sense. However, they missed a few points on that. As you increase your intensity and you utilize more and more carbohydrates, you'll use up your glycogen stores. That's true. You'll burn carbohydrates as an energy source. But once you have finished your activity, once you are done working out, your body needs to replenish the carbohydrate stores. So you used up your muscle glycogen, the carbohydrate within the muscle. Now your body needs to replenish it. It will replenish it from your fat stores. So you finished your workout, you went for your higher intensity run, you came home, you showered, you're sitting down, you're reading a book, and now your body's replenishing your glycogen, and it's doing that from your fat stores. Okay, so really that is where confusion occurred. That at the end of the day, it's the number of calories you burn. So I can go for a long, slow 4-hour walk and burn X number of calories, or I could go a higher intensity run for 1 hour. I'm making up those numbers, okay? But let's just assume that that works out to be in the same number of calories burned. At the end of the day, it creates the same energy deficit and will result in the same fat loss. So really don't confuse, when we talk about fat and carbohydrates, don't confuse what we're taking in with what we have either. So once again, when we take in fats and carbohydrates, we will digest them both to sugar. We digest them both to glucose. And that glucose will either get used up right away, glucose being a carbohydrate, or else if we consume too much, that extra sugar, that extra glucose from the carbohydrate and fat will be stored as fat. Okay? And when we burn calories, if we utilize our glucose, which is glycogen stores, and if we use those up, we will replenish them using our fat stores. Okay? Or we will simply require energy at such a low intensity that we can immediately deliver fat. Okay? So let me just now read all these key points. So that's what I just explained. So activity draws fuel from both fat and carbohydrate stores. During prolonged aerobic exercise at a low intensity, exercising muscles will obtain the majority of their energies from fats because you have enough time to mobilize and oxidize fats for energy. As the intensity goes up, so during high intensity exercises, the muscles obtain more of their energy from carbohydrates to fat. Okay? So eventually you could go to a point that you'll solely use carbohydrates as an energy source as that intensity increases. However, our body fat loss is determined by the difference between calories taken in and calories used, which is your energy output, okay? Not by whether you originally got those from your carbohydrate stores or your fat stores. So as I said, if you used up your carbohydrate stores in your body as glycogen, your body fat will be broken down to replenish that energy source. Just as a pointer, it does take 3,500 calories to burn off 1 pound of fat. So continuing, energy intake is essential for body fat for functions and to replenish carbohydrate stores. The more carbohydrates that have to be replenished, So meaning if we burned off a lot of carbohydrates with our exercise, the less it will be stored as fat. And then when it comes to what you have your individual do, whether it's high versus low intensity, you have to remember other things too, is like whether or not it's functional fitness for them. If you're choosing activities for their lifestyle and interests, whether they enjoy it or not. So don't automatically go, oh, well, this type is better, this type's better. No, at the end of the day, a calorie deficit, so if you burn off calories with activity and body fat, that all ends up coming from our body fat stores, and we store less. So body composition, so what you're made of, is really more a reliable indicator of health than body weight alone. Okay, so body weight alone, if I step on a scale and I weigh myself, that doesn't tell me what I'm made of. So I could be a very muscular, fit individual, and when I step on the scale, I will have a high body weight. But that does not mean that I will have the risks associated with people that carry too much body fat. So if I could look at what I'm made of instead, what my body composition is, if I have excess body fat, I run the risk of having increased stress on my joints. It's hard on the joints because you weigh more. Excess body fat also increases my risk of metabolic disorders such as diabetes, so type 2 diabetes. Also, my risk of sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is going to result in a spike of blood pressure, so it's hard on the heart. Excess body fat will also lead to higher blood pressure and heart disease, blindness, glaucoma, kidney disease, and poor extremity circulation. So these are the risks and the real risks with excess body fat. This is why we don't want to be carrying excess body fat. No, it's incorrect to think that we all need to be a size 2 or we all need to be, like 10% body fat, or 15 if you're thinking females. That's not true either. So we don't want to take this to the extremes, but we do need to be aware that excess body fats come with health risks. The CSEP, which is the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology, suggests using a few techniques to analyze our body composition. So we use two techniques. We use what's called the body mass index as well as waist circumference measurements. So the first one, body mass index, or BMI, is a comparison of the individual's weight versus their height. So to calculate your BMI, it's going to be your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. And so when I take my weight in kilograms divided by my height in meters squared, it's going to give me a number. And I apologize, I don't have the numbers immediately in front of me. I think it's anything under 9 for adults. Anything under 19.5 is underweight. I think it's 19.5 to 24.99 would be considered healthy body weight. 25 to 30 is overweight, and then around 30 plus is obese. That's how we calculate it. The body mass index is not perfect because it doesn't tell us what you're made of. So once again, a very muscular person is going to weigh more because of the muscle mass. Muscle weighs about 2.5 times the amount that fat does. So they weigh a lot, and you meet these people that you're shocked how much they weigh because you don't take into account how much muscle they really have. So they have high numbers. So a very fit, larger muscled individual is going to have a very high weight. So their BMI score is going to be very high. So even though they might not have too much body fat on them, they might come back with a score of obese. Maybe their score is in the 30s. So it's not perfect. Body mass index does give us a general number to give us something to start from. There has been made connections that people with high BMIs are at higher risk of multiple diseases. So it's not a useless calculation, but it's not a perfect calculation. Ideally, we are going to use that number along with our waist circumference. So waist circumference is what the measurement around your abdomen is. And different techniques will give you different places and measurements. I believe CSEP is currently using just above the iliac crest is where they take their measurement from, just above, or maybe it's, yeah, I think it's right at the very top point of the iliac crest. Now, we like waist circumference measurement because now it tells us something interesting about body composition. It tells us where we carry fat. So I'm sure you have heard before that the apple-shaped individuals, so the individuals that carry fat around their stomach, are less healthy than the pear-shaped individuals. And those are individuals that carry fat in their lower extremities. So the women would be hips and buttocks and that. That's true. There's a lot of information showing that people that carry fat around their abdomen are at much higher risk for disease. So abdominal fat is a risk factor for hypertension, that's high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, dyslipidemia, that just means unhealthy blood fat profiles, so you have too much fat within the bloodstream or a bad composition of it, and metabolic syndrome, which is going to be a syndrome with hypertension, type 2 diabetes, etc. Lots of risk factors. So we want, if we're carrying fat, not to have it around our stomach. So really calculations, we want a combination of using body mass index and waist circumference to give us an idea. I've already mentioned that a body mass index, it does not distinguish between fat mass and fat-free mass. And it really doesn't tell us anything about our fat distribution. We don't know where that fat is, so we don't know if you're apple-shaped or more pear-shaped. It's also not applicable for individuals that are under the age of 18 or older adults or pregnant women. So other concepts with body composition is the concept of hypertrophy. And we've spoken a lot about hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is a growth and increase of the size of the muscle cells. So the muscle cell itself becomes larger. Hypertrophy, we don't experience something called hyperplasia. So when our muscles grow, we have the same number of muscle fibers. It's just that those muscle fibers are thicker or bigger. So the cross-sectional area, so if you imagine your bicep muscle cut in half, so someone does a transverse cut across the bicep muscle, those muscle fibers will all be bigger and wider. That's what happens with hypertrophy. And what will happen is it will have more contractile proteins within that fiber, so more actin and myosin. We'll have more structural proteins, myofibrils, within each fiber. We'll also have an increased amount of connective tendinous and ligamentous, so connective tissues, tendons, and ligaments. As well, within the muscle fiber itself, will also store more enzymes and nutrients. So really that muscle fiber becomes wider and takes up more space because of these extra things we're storing within it. And this is where you get that increased muscle mass. We do not, for the most part, do not experience hyperplasia, which means adding on more muscle fibers. We don't do that. We don't add more muscle fibers. We take the existing muscle fibers we have and they get bigger. The amount of hypertrophy that you will experience can be dependent on your fiber type and the type of exercise you are doing. So if you are predisposed, that you carry a lot of type 2 or fast twitch muscle fibers, those muscle fibers will respond better to strength training exercises, and so they will get bigger than type 1 muscle fibers. So someone with type 2 muscle fibers will have an ability to grow their muscle a lot larger. The other things that it's dependent on is the parameters of exercise. So what you're doing. So are you doing a hypertrophy program with high volume, high strength training? So that will also make a big difference. Atrophy, so hypertrophy means hyper is a lot, like an increase. Trophy is growth, okay? So now we're going to talk about atrophy. A meaning not or without growth. So it's actually, atrophy is a decrease in the muscle mass. And this could be a partial or complete wasting of the muscle. The reason they have an older adult in this picture or cartoon of one is that we experience atrophy normally as we age. So as individuals age, they have less muscle mass. And this is usually cause is age, but mainly a decline in their physical activity. They're not using it. And remember we talked about the principle of reversibility. If you don't use it, you lose it. I will take a moment to mention that there are eating disorders and very, very serious eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa and bulimia. So anorexia where they perceive themselves incorrectly in the mirror and they opt not to eat. And opt, like these are psychological diseases. And bulimia, these are going to be the ones that will purge. So they will tend to vomit or use laxatives, etc. These are very, very serious conditions. These are far outside of your scope of practice with the Manitoba Fitness Council, that you should really be referring these individuals to qualified professionals. So if you are aware or you suspect something, try to get the person help. So we've been talking a lot about too many calories going in, so an increase in percentage body fat. But there is the opposite end where somebody does not have enough body fat, and these are disorders individuals can die from. So please do refer out and get them help as needed. So the last thing I really want to stress is this concept of health at every size. That you can be healthy, potentially you can be overweight, but still healthy. That just because you're not a size 2 or an individual is not a size 2, or if an individual has 20% body fat or they're not that perfect physique, that doesn't mean that they're not healthy and that they can't still enjoy life. There is a natural diversity of body sizes and shapes, and that we have to really accept and respect this. That people are beautiful for their own reasons, that everything is well. As long as we are being active and healthy, that is all that matters. And in fact, individuals that carry excess body fat can gain health benefits without losing any of that body fat. So simply being more physically active will improve their health profiles, even if they never see any body fat loss. So we want to make sure that we encourage people to eat in a flexible manner, okay, that values pleasure and that honors internal cues of hunger, fullness, and appetite, so that we're eating as we require, not eating emotionally or overeating and being unhappy about things. We want to encourage people to find the joy in moving one's own body and becoming more physically active. I encourage you to watch what you say in classes. Watch how you present information. That we don't make comments like, you don't use it, or you don't move it, you need to move it to lose it, and imply that we only exercise to be a certain size, that we only exercise for fat loss. There are so many health benefits to activity that we don't want to limit people by focusing on body fat. Yes, there are health risks to excess body fat, but we want to have a very natural, real, healthy relationship with food. So be careful of what you say. Be careful of implying that one body type is better than another. And don't do it in the flip way. Go, you don't want to be a scrawny little stick when you're cueing people. You don't say something like that, because the slender individual in class will also feel terrible about themselves. There is no one correct body. There's no right way to have a body. So please encourage diversity, encourage healthy habits, both in exercise and in eating. So our discussion points, the 5 factors that affect metabolism, that would be your body composition, your age, your gender, your ethnicity, and your physical conditions. For example, pregnant women, children going through a growth spurt. It could also be an athlete, those type of physical conditions. Why do we care so much more about waist circumference versus body composition? or why do we care about waist circumference when measuring body composition? Pardon me. Waist circumference will tell us if we are storing the excess body fat in our abdomen. Abdominal body fat is concerning to us because that's going to increase our risk factors for many health diseases. And finally, we'd like you to calculate the body mass index for a man that's 1.8 meters tall and weighs 75 kilograms. So your equation would be weight divided by height in meters squared. So you'd be dividing 75 by 1.8 squared. So that would be 75 divided by 3.24. And that will give you a body mass index of 23.15. So 23. 23 is considered a healthy, normal weight range. So please, I know I said that very quickly, so just sort of jot down those numbers and try those calculations yourself until you're comfortable that you can do them. Thank you.